Chapter 19. Airy Voices. April 3rd, 19 There are times when I am tempted to believe in the influence of evil stars or the reality of unlucky days. Otherwise, how can such diabolical things happen as do happen to well-meaning people? Aunt Ruth has only just begun to grow weary of recalling the night she found Perry kissing me in the dining room. And now I'm in another ridiculous scrape. I will be honest. It was not dropping my umbrella which was responsible for it. Neither was it the fact that I let the kitchen mirror at New Moon fall last Saturday and crack. It was just my own carelessness. St. John's Presbyterian Church here in Shrewsbury became vacant at New Year's and has been hearing candidates. Mr. Towers of the Times asked me to report the sermons for his paper on such Sundays as I was not in Blairwater. The first sermon was good, and I reported it with pleasure. The second one was harmless, very harmless, and I reported it without pain. But the third, which I heard last Sunday, was ridiculous. I said so to Aunt Ruth on the way home from church, and Aunt Ruth said, "Do you think you are competent to criticize a sermon?" Well, yes, I do. That sermon was a most inconsistent thing. Mr. Wickham contradicted himself half a dozen times. He mixed his metaphors. He attributed something to St. Paul that belonged to Shakespeare. He committed almost every conceivable literary sin, including the unpardonable one of being deadly dull. However, it was my business to report the sermon, so report it I did. Then, I had to do something to get it out of my system, so I wrote, for my own satisfaction, an analysis of it. It was a crazy but delightful deed. I showed up all the inconsistencies, the misquotations, the weaknesses, and the wobblings. I enjoyed writing it. I made it as pointed and satirical and satanical as I could. Oh, I admit it was a very vitriolic document. Then, I handed it into the Times by mistake. Mr. Towers passed it over to the typesetter without reading it. He had a touching confidence in my work, which he will never have again. It came out the next day. I woke to find myself infamous. I expected Mr. Towers would be furious, but he is only mildly annoyed, and a little amused at the back of it. It isn't as if Mr. Wickham had been a settled minister here, of course. Nobody cared for him or his sermon, and Mr. Towers is a Presbyterian, so the St. John's people can't accuse him of wanting to insult them. It is poor Emily B. on whom is laid the whole burden of condemnation. It appears most of them think I did it to show off. Aunt Ruth is furious, Aunt Elizabeth outraged, Aunt Laura grieved, Cousin Jimmy alarmed. It is such a shocking thing to criticize a minister's sermon. It is a Murray tradition that ministers' sermons, Presbyterian ministers especially, are sacrosanct. My presumption and vanity will yet be the ruin of me, so Aunt Elizabeth coldly informs me. The only person who seems pleased is Mr. Carpenter. Dean is away in New York. I know he would like it too. Mr. Carpenter is telling everyone that my report is the best thing of its kind he ever read. But Mr. Carpenter is suspected of heresy, so his commendation will not go far to rehabilitate me. I feel wretched over the affair. My mistakes worry me more than my sins sometimes. And yet, an unholy something way back in me is grinning over it all. Every word in that report was true. And more than true, appropriate. I didn't mix my metaphors. Now to live this down. April 20th, 19 Awake, thou north wind, and come, thou south. Blow upon my garden, that the spices thereof may flow out. So chanted I as I went through the land of uprightness this evening, only I put woods in place of garden. For spring is just around the corner, and I have forgotten everything but gladness. We had a gray, rainy dawn, but sunshine came in the afternoon, and a bit of April frost tonight, just enough to make the earth firm. It seemed to me a night when the ancient gods might be met with in the lonely places. But I saw nothing except some sly things back among the fir copses that may have been companies of goblins if they weren't merely shadows. I wonder why goblin is such an enchanting word, and gobbling such an ugly one. And why is shadowy suggestive of all beauty, while umbrageous is so ugly? But I heard all kinds of fairy sounds, and each gave me an exquisite vanishing joy as I went up the hill. There is always something satisfying in climbing up to the top of a hill, and that is a hilltop I love. When I reached it, I stood still, and let the loveliness of the evening flow through me like music. How the windwoman was singing in the bits of birchland around me. How she whistled in the serrated tops of the trees against the sky. One of the 13 new silver moons of the year was hanging over the harbor. I stood there and thought of many, many beautiful things, of wild free brooks running through starlit April fields, of rippled gray satin seas, of the grace of an elm against the moonlight, of roots stirring and thrilling in the earth, owls laughing in darkness, a curl of foam on a long sandy shore, a young moon setting over a dark hill, the gray of Gulf storms. I had only 75 cents in the world, but paradise isn't bought with money. Then I sat down on an old boulder and tried to put those moments of delicate happiness into a poem. I caught the shape of them fairly well, I think, but not their soul. It escaped me. It was quite dark when I came back, and the whole character of my land of uprightness seemed changed. It was eerie, almost sinister. I would have run if I could have dared. The trees, my old well-known friends, were strange and aloof. The sounds I heard were not the cheery, companionable sounds of daytime, nor the friendly fairy sounds of the sunset. They were creeping and weird, as if the life of the woods had suddenly developed something almost hostile to me, something, at least, that was furtive and alien and unacquainted. I could fancy that I heard stealthy footsteps all around me, that strange eyes were watching me through the boughs. When I reached the open space and hopped over the fence into Aunt Ruth's backyard, I felt as if I were escaping from some fascinating, but not altogether hallowed, locality, a place given over to paganism and the revels of satyrs. I don't believe the woods are ever wholly Christian in the darkness. There is always a lurking life in them that dares not show itself to the sun, but regains its own with the night. "You should not be out in the damp with that cough of yours," said Aunt Ruth. But it wasn't the damp that hurt me, for I was hurt. It was that little fascinating whisper of something unholy. I was afraid of it, and yet I loved it. The beauty I had loved on the hilltop seemed suddenly quite tasteless beside it. I sat down in my room and wrote another poem. When I had written it, I felt that I had exorcised something out of my soul, and Emily in the glass seemed no longer a stranger to me. Aunt Ruth has just brought in a dose of hot milk and cayenne pepper for my cough. It is on the table before me. I have to drink it. And it has made both paradise and Paganland seem very foolish and unreal. May 25th, 19 Dean came home from New York last Friday, and that evening we walked and talked in New Moon Garden in a weird, uncanny twilight following a rainy day. I had a light dress on, and as Dean came down the path he said, "When I saw you first, I thought you were a wild white cherry tree, like that." And he pointed to one that was leaning and beckoning, ghost fair in the dusk, from Lofty John's bush. It was such a beautiful thing that just to be distantly compared to it made me feel very well pleased with myself, and it was lovely to have dear old Dean back again. So we had a delightful evening, and picked a bunch of Cousin Jimmy's pansies, and watched the gray rain clouds draw together in gray-purple masses in the east, leaving the western sky all clear and star-powdered. "There is something in your company," said Dean, "that makes the stars seem starrier and pansies purpler." Wasn't that nice of him? How is it that his opinion of me and Aunt Ruth's opinion of me are so very different? He had a little flat parcel under his arm, and when he went away he handed it to me. "I brought you that to counteract Lord Byron," he said. It was a framed copy of the Portrait of Giovanna degli Albizzi, wife of Lorenzo Tornabuoni Ghirlandaio, a lady of the Quattrocento. I brought it to Shrewsbury, and have it hanging in my room. I love to look at the Lady Giovanna, that slim, beautiful young thing, with her sleek coils of pale gold, and her prim little curls, and her fine high-bred profile. Did the painter flatter her? And her white neck, and open, unshadowed brow, with the indefinable air over it all of saintliness and remoteness and fate, for the Lady Giovanna died young. And her embroidered velvet sleeves, slashed and puffed, very beautifully made and fitting the arm perfectly. The Lady Giovanna must have had a good dressmaker, and, in spite of her saintliness, one thinks she was quite aware of the fact. I am always wishing that she would turn her head and let me see her full face. Aunt Ruth thinks she is queer-looking, and evidently doubts the propriety of having her in the same room with the jeweled chromo of Queen Alexandra. I doubt it myself. June 10th, 19 I do all my studying now by the pool in the land of uprightness, among those wonderful tall slender trees. I'm a druidess in the woods. I regard trees with something more than love, worship. And then, too, trees, unlike so many humans, always improve on acquaintance. No matter how much you like them at the start, you are sure to like them much better further on. And best of all when you have known them for years, and enjoyed intercourse with them in all seasons. I know 100 dear things about these trees in the land of uprightness that I didn't know when I came here 2 years ago. Trees have as much individuality as human beings. Not even 2 spruces are alike. There is always some kink or curve or bend of bough to single each one out from its fellows. Some trees love to grow sociably together, their branches twining, like Ilsa and me with our arms about each other, whispering interminably of their secrets. Then there are more exclusive groups of 4 or 5, clan Murray trees. And there are hermits of trees, who choose to stand apart in solitary state, and who hold commune only with the winds of heaven. Yet these trees are often the best worth knowing. One feels it is more of a triumph to win their confidence than that of easier trees. Tonight, I suddenly saw a great pulsating star resting on the very crest of the big fir that stands alone in the eastern corner, and I had a sense of two majesties meeting that will abide with me for days and enchant everything, even classroom routine and dishwashing and Aunt Ruth's Saturday cleaning. June 25th, 19 We had our history examination today, the Tudor period. I found it very fascinating, but more because of what isn't in the histories than of what is. They can't tell you what you would really like to know. What did Jane Seymour think of when she was awake in the dark? Of murdered Anne, or of pale forsaken Catherine, or just about the fashion of her new ruff? Did she ever think she had paid too high for her crown, or was she satisfied with her bargain? And was she happy in those few hours after her little son was born? Or did she see a ghostly procession beckoning her onward with them? Was Lady Jane Grey Janey to her friends, and did she ever have a fit of temper? What did Shakespeare's wife actually think of him? And was any man ever really in love with Queen Elizabeth? I am always asking questions like this when I study that pageant of kings and queens and geniuses and puppets, put down in the school curriculum as the Tudor period. July 7th, 19 2 years of high school are over. The result of my exams was such as to please even Aunt Ruth, who condescended to say that she always knew I could study if I put my mind to it. In brief, I led my class, and I'm pleased, but I begin to understand what Dean meant when he said real education was what you dug out of life for yourself. After all, the things that have taught me the most these past 2 years have been my wanderings in the land of uprightness, and my night on the haystack, and the Lady Giovanna, and the old woman who spanked the king, and trying to write nothing but facts, and things like that. Even rejection slips and hating Evelyn Blake have taught me something. Speaking of Evelyn, she failed in her exams and will have to take her senior year over again. I am truly sorry. That sounds as if I were a most amiable, forgiving creature. Let me be perfectly frank. I am sorry she didn't pass, because if she had, she wouldn't be in school next year.